That's better. Good morning. Thank you all so much for being here today. It's super early and I don't know how anyone has as much energy as Nicole in general, let alone at this hour. Me too. But you all get out of bed and that makes me really happy, so thanks for coming. I'm a designer and art director, but if I was being completely honest, my business cards could also say professional Googler, skilled post-rationalist, full-time emailer, chasing unpaid invoices all the damn timer, and I could go on. I won't, but I could. But I am mainly a designer. Some of the work I do looks a bit like this. And as Nicole mentioned, I've worked on kind of bigger projects like banks and airports and smaller ones like cafes and independent artists, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Because I want to start by talking about the theme of honesty. And because it is the theme of honesty, I can be very honest during this talk and say that I'm super nervous, and I'm really glad I'm holding a microphone and clicker, because otherwise I would not know what to do with my hands right now. So I'm like stoked about that. But doing a talk about honesty would imply that I am in fact an honest person. But I started questioning if that was actually true. So cue moment of identity crisis. And when I told a friend this, he just cracked up laughing and he was like, strap yourselves in, folks, because he just knew all the deep holes and tangents that this topic could take me on. But since, from a young age, we're told that honesty is good, that it's the kind of behavior that will be rewarded. But as I was kind of putting this talk together, I realized that it's maybe not that simple. For example, what's the opposite of honesty? Is it flat out lying? And is honesty always synonymous with truth? So these are the kinds of things that I was asking myself, and I found myself navigating quite a bit of grey. For example, would you rather, there's some nervous faces in the crowd, say every honest thing that ever came to your mind out loud, or never speak again? I would definitely be mute, absolutely mute. Never speak again. Because I don't want to know everything that's on your mind, and you don't want to know everything's on my mind. I don't think that we could handle it. I know that I absolutely couldn't. So today I'm here to argue about that honesty is perhaps not always the best policy. And before you get on your ethical high horse, don't worry, I'm going to tell you why. Because honesty, I think it is inextricably linked to truth. However, I don't think that being honest necessarily means being kind or being helpful or being sexy or being easy, and I'm going to tell you why. So let's start with being kind. Anyone that has been asked the question, does my butt look big in this, knows there's only one correct answer. If you go off script, other answers can tend to get you into a little bit of trouble. If you do tend to breach the topic, we tend to go with the commend, recommend, commend approach, aka the shit sandwich. So this is especially relevant with creative work as well, especially when giving critical feedback. And we tend to put the critical feedback in between like two perfect toast slices to soften the blow. Generally speaking, we like to embellish the truth not to offend, but at the end of the day, you're still kind of telling someone to eat shit. So honesty doesn't always equal kind in the same way that honesty doesn't always equal helpful. So I'm from Tamworth. I know one other person's from Tamworth in the room because it's my brother. But about 4 years ago, I decided to move to Germany. People always ask me why I moved to Berlin, and I think this question sums it up quite nicely. For those of you who can't see or maybe don't believe your eyes, that is in fact 10 avocados for €1. And I feel like now I'm going to be responsible for like a mass exodus of millennials moving to Germany all of a sudden. But jokes aside, the answer is, well, why not? I didn't speak a word of German at the time, but for some reason at 23, I thought that this was something I was perfectly capable of doing. My time in Germany can be summarized as a bit of this. So just being so excited and kind of pinching myself that I was living in this incredible city. And also a lot of this. Probably more of this. So yeah, a lot of the emotions were flying high, and the reasons for this was paralyzing existentialism. Because I can only speak from personal experience, but moving abroad, suddenly you want to add meaning to everything. So you've moved so far away from your friends and family, and it's like you have to make it worth it. In Germany, they speak German. Go figure. But they also speak better English than me anyway. There's kind of a bit of a joke that if you ask a German if they speak English, they'll always respond a little. And the translation is that they're fluent. Whereas if you ask an English-speaking expat if they speak German, they'll also answer a little, but the translation is more like they can order a beer and a bratwurst. So I'm not going to stand up here and defend my shitty Deutsch, but do you know what was the least helpful thing about learning a language? People being honest with me and telling me how bad it was. But as a result of this, I managed to develop quite a bit of empathy for my fellow non-native speaking Germans. And I'll never forget this time when I was coming out of a train station and I was walking out and I saw this guy starting to approach me, and I was like, oh God, what's this going to be about? But then he looked so nervous, and he came up to me and he kind of was like, Entschuldigung, sprechen Sie English? And I was like, oh yeah, no worries, dude, I got you. And he was just looking for directions, and I happened to know the place that he was looking for, and I was like, it's just straight down the road, few blocks, take a right, it's on the corner, you won't miss it. And he was so grateful, and he was like, thank you so much. But just before he turned around to head in that direction, he kind of turned back and looked at me. He goes, by the way, your English is really good. To which I replied, why, thank you. So the truth of supply is reflected from the demand. And in this certain scenario, I just didn't have the heart to tell him. So honesty doesn't always equal sexy. And the pressure to be sexy in 2018 is out of control, says the girl who is currently sweating through her onesie right now. And I think the pressure mainly stems from this little device, and especially this app. I have a very love-hate relationship with Instagram, and I have some theories around the color gradient and why they chose these particular colors. But it's true. This application, it's created a level of expectations that's really hard to live up to, and it kind of can cause quite a bit of anxiety. And I think that anyone who hasn't experienced or tells you that they haven't experienced anxiety as a result of social media is either lying or Beyonce. So just a little example. This is me. So this photo is complete smoke and mirrors. If you actually look closely at this photo, there's only 2 pieces of furniture in it. There's a table and a chair. So this is when I just moved to Germany, and I was like, okay, I have to look professional. 2 pieces of furniture to my name. But while this was my current setup at the time that this photo was taken, my day-to-day didn't really look like this. In fact, it probably looked a bit more like this. Yeah. So similarly, this photo, which I like to call my red steel, this is my I have my shit together headshot, So it's meant to ooze independent designer and art director working on international projects with an endless supply of white t-shirts and red lipstick. So while that is true, mainly just the part about the lipstick, behind every good photo, there's about 100 more that are exactly the same that didn't quite make the cut. So this is also the reality. This one says, making stuff up as I go while I shop online for things I can't afford to put in an apartment I don't have, located in a country I don't live. Current status. But both are equally true. So, we all have layers. We're all like onions. So let's not confuse the highlight reel of the internet with actual everyday real life. Honesty doesn't always equal easy, especially when we have to make tough decisions and difficult things about ourselves. So when I decided to move to Germany, it wasn't really by any fault of Australia. I was living with my best friends. I had just landed my dream job. I was helping organize Creative Mornings with Flynn. So yeah, life was definitely good. But I knew that I really wanted to go overseas, and I knew that if I didn't give it a shot, I wasn't being honest with myself. And being honest with yourself can be really tough. And I just want to say as a little side note though that like I moved from one country to another, and that was coming from a very privileged position. And I moved purely to seek life experience, unlike the many people that are seeking refuge from war and persecution. So I basically just want to preface that with all the things I'm talking about today, that this is pretty first world. But living overseas in general, I had to swallow a lot of pretty hard to swallow pills. I don't know is anyone familiar with this meme? It's my favorite meme because I just never seem to run out of pills. But so I recently moved from Germany, and there are kind of a lot of reasons why I left Berlin, but just a few would be that winter is coming. And while European summer is so amazing, like the days just stretch forever, and it is honestly the most incredible time, winter, oh God, I feel sick actually just thinking about going through that again, because it just basically goes from black to grey for months on end, and that just really affected me. Second thing would be that no matter where I live, I'm always going to be missing someone. So in Berlin, I was there for 4 years, so I had kind of, I'd really created a life there, and it was hard to accept that leaving the city meant also leaving this second family that I had found. And third, Berlin is definitely a city that can take a toll on your mental health. And I know that there's a bit of a stigma around this, which is why it's often hard for me to open up about a lot of the anxiety that a lot of very kind of everyday situations would cause me. So things like going to the dentist, or things like just answering the phone were so much harder over there. And when I first got there, I really thrived off this. I loved the challenge, and it was really exciting. But towards the end, I kind of started realizing that I wasn't really thriving anymore, and I was probably closer to just surviving. And again, like this is a very first world problem to have, but I also think that's part of the issue in the sense that we kind of just hide behind the fact that our problems aren't that bad, and so we choose to do nothing about them. But more often than not, the power is ours, and we're able to change our circumstances, and we can do something about it. But we're usually just scared, and being honest about being scared isn't always easy. So I know I've talked a lot about general life stuff, but it's just like Alison Gallagher perfectly tweeted. It's just like that old saying, do what you love for a living, and the increasingly unclear distinction between your personal and professional identity will make it extremely difficult to feel emotionally secure at basically any point in the process. I relate to this a lot. But process is really interesting, and I think it's also really important. So it got me thinking, okay, what does honesty mean to me in the context of my work? So I'm going to go through a few things that I find to be true. The first one being that the best projects are the ones that you really believe in. And I don't mean that you always have to be like saving the turtles or working for charity or something like that. Just something that you personally feel invested in, and it generally means that you're going to put in a lot more effort to bring that idea to life. So this is something I worked on recently. It's a cafe in Neukölln called Marlow Brunch Bar. And Marlow's, it's kind of eclectic and unconventional when compared to the contemporary cafe scene in Berlin at the moment. And this is a shot of the final interior, but when I was originally brought on board for this project, it looked like this. Yep. I had to believe in this because this was, not doing it for me. The owners had never run a business before. But I really liked what they were trying to do, so I was like, okay, I'm going to help make this happen. And that included so many things outside of my usual skill set. And that included helping gut the place, laying the new floor, even figuring out how the seating arrangement would work, and then picking out lights and furniture, so all kinds of things. And I was involved from the very beginning, which made this super fun. So yeah, definitely not as glamorous as the final pictures, and I think I always love showing this kind of thing because I think it provides a lot of context for kind of the process to get to the very end. But, you know, it was so much fun, and I think doing things yourself is really satisfying. So, and it also makes you work with the budget that you have. So they couldn't afford to vinyl the counter. But I knew that I really wanted it to be a statement piece of the interior. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to hand paint this, even though I had never done anything like that before. I was like, yeah, why not? But the cool thing is when you believe in something is that it tends to be quite contagious and infectious, and then other people want to get involved too. So this was actually a public holiday, and just a few days before the cafe was going to open, and my two friends, Amy and Tyrone, helped me paint it so that I could get it done in time. So yeah, I think that this was such a rewarding project because of that reason. And part of the brand was kind of that Marlo is like a bit of a quirky uncle or, you know, other family member or relative. So it was a place that didn't feel too cool, and you always felt welcome in when you came in. And we really tried to inject this kind of fun personality into the branding as much as possible. And even though we didn't have a lot of budget, we kind of did it in ways that were maybe cost effective, but just as good. So things like silly coffee art to make people smile when they get their coffee. It's probably a bit too small to read, but the loyalty cards read, "To espresso gratitude, your 10th coffee is on us." So no pun was spared, rest assured. And no kind of application was too small to inject part of this personality. Even the menu, we named all of the dishes to be fun little names. So instead of avocado toast, we called it Avogo Marlo. The pancakes were called Stacks On. And my personal favorite, which was a cheese sandwich, one of the owners is French, and I called it Sailor Brie, and I definitely appreciated it a lot more than he did. Yeah. This is why it's great to be back in Australia. I'm like, everyone gets my humor. So creativity is seldom bred in solitude, and that's why collaboration is so important. This is a book I designed about my friend Sharon, go figure. It's called Shit Sharon Says, and basically she is hilarious, and she just says a lot of the most just ridiculous things, and it turns out there's a lot of content in that. But this project it started as just a silly idea, and then it really escalated the second I started bringing friends in to help bring it to life. And I really love the final photos, but I think the behind the scenes are even better. So this is the setup of kind of how we created these images. This is Zoe Noble. She's a really talented photographer. Sharon, who is the muse. Christoph, who is wearing a kimono for reasons I don't remember. But he came along to the shoot because he was super excited, but also he did all these amazing illustrations to put in the book that were kind of based on a lot of the quotes that she had said, and they kind of sat with the quotes, and they looked really cute. So again, if I did this by myself, there's no way this would have turned out the way it did. And while it is absolutely ludicrous that we turned this silly thing into like quite a big production, we went from writing it to designing it to illustrating it to publishing it to art directing it and photographing it. So yeah, it ended up being a lot bigger than I originally expected. So you know the saying, never let the truth get in the way of a good story? Well, stories they're also visual, and telling a good one can mean bending the truth just a tad sometimes. This is for a performing artist in Berlin called Lady Lee. And she does a lot of different acts. So she does things from circus showgirl to kind of Berlin underground fetish, burlesque. And then she also does a lot of aerial stuff. So aerial silks and aerial hoop. And this stuff is amazing. But the issue with this was that we couldn't find a studio that had rigging. So we couldn't actually suspend her from the roof to take the photos, which is kind of a bit of a problem when you're trying to show, you know, all the impressive things that she can do. But we couldn't find a studio, so we just had to get creative. And so on the left here, you can see a final image that we ended up going with, and on the right, you can see the setup to create this image. So it's really, this was kind of a tough one because we had to kind of represent her and kind of show, allude to some kind of idea of what she would do with these things and not make it look like you're just flapping around in a blue set of curtains or something. And I thought it might be interesting to show an original image versus a final retouched image. So the image on the left is the original. It's a bit hard to see with the projector, unfortunately, but I circled it. So these are just to show some of the changes that we made. Like obviously we boosted the saturation a little bit, but you know, I didn't like this feather. It kind of distracted me at the top, and you know, but really it's not that different. Probably the biggest thing is that we switched her arm out. So I don't know if anyone spotted that, but it's a different arm in the final picture. I kind of just liked how that one was extended more. So I was like, can we just, you know, switch that one in? So we comped that one in. I mean, technically it's still her arm. But yeah, it can be a really slippery slope with work like this. And I guess that's why I kind of wanted to show the comparison, because I definitely never want to be in the business of photoshopping people to kind of uphold this very unrealistic expectation of beauty. So just some of the final images that we used, and we were all super stoked with this, but these images are definitely not perfect. But that's not really my goal when I'm creating this kind of thing. My goal is kind of just to make work that's polished and not perfect, because for one, perfection doesn't really exist, and if it did, it would be super boring. So another thing that I believe in is that trust comes from asking questions and not necessarily from having all the answers. And I find this especially true when it comes to working with clients and kind of finding out about their industries. So when a client gets me involved, like I definitely don't pretend to know everything about what they do, because most of the time I don't. For example, something I worked on recently was a kombucha brand, and I love kombucha, it's delicious. I know it's a bit of a fad right now, but it's kind of taking off, and even though I drink it, I still didn't really know that much about the brewing process and how it was made. So when these guys asked me to do the branding for them, I was like, yeah, sure, but I would really love to come and like see how you brew it and see how you make it, and learn about your process and stuff. And they were based in Paris, so tough life, I had to fly to Paris. But I did exactly that, and I touched the weird SCOBY thing, which was, so disgusting, but I still maintain that it's delicious. And, you know, tried all the different flavors and kind of saw how they put it together, and it's quite actually like meticulous how they make their recipes and stuff. So that was super fascinating, and I learned so much about that. And then we spent the whole day like walking around Paris and going to different supermarkets, and they were kind of talking me through what the current market's like and what other kind of beverages French people drink, because kombucha is not very big there at the moment. And they're kind of trying to break into that industry, and spending that time with them, although like maybe other people would see that as a waste of time, or just like kind of taking the piss and making it as like a free trip to Paris. But I honestly can't express how valuable this kind of time is at the beginning of a project. And for me and for my process, like I spent a lot of time in the beginning really getting to know my clients and knowing what their industry is about. And another example of this is a weaver that I just did some branding for. Both of these projects are kind of new, so they haven't launched yet, so I can't show you the final work, unfortunately. But again, it felt really weird to do branding for a weaver when I had no idea what weaving was even about. I didn't even know that was a thing. It is. And she weaves with this amazing merino wool, but this is a loom. Like I had never even seen a loom before I went to her studio, and she showed me a little demo of how she actually creates these things. And while she was preparing these like mini looms that she was preparing for a workshop. But you know, her studio was tiny and it had all these amazing contraptions and kind of gadgets. And what I love about this part of the process is that so much inspiration can generate from this, and like just talking to your clients, and most of the time they already know what they want. You just kind of have to get it out of them. And for this particular project, all of the identity, all of the branding, all of the visuals, all the inspiration came from this one studio visit, which I just think is invaluable. So while you know you have to become educated about your client's industry, you also have to teach them about ours, which I know is really hard, and it does kind of suck sometimes because you feel like you're constantly telling clients the same thing over and over again. But transparency is a two-way street. So when I find myself doing this and pulling my hair out over clients, I know that I have to take equal responsibility for that, because it generally means that I haven't put up enough work in the beginning to kind of explain my process and what they should expect from me. So thankfully, fewer moments like this are happening now, but they still do happen. So I also think that you should share things with your peers and just your knowledge and experiences in general. And I really believe that scarcity mindset is for suckers. So for people that maybe don't know what scarcity mindset is, it's the belief that there's never going to be enough resources to go around. So it's better to be selfish than it is to be generous. And I'm calling bullshit. And I really learned this when I started writing my newsletter, OMG Lord. So Nicole touched on it a little bit earlier, but what is OMG Lord? It's basically a newsletter and blog that I write every week. And I've been writing for 3.5 years now. Which is kind of crazy. But put simply, it's things that make G-Lord say, oh my God. And I've learned so much from doing this project. The first one kind of being, that scarcity mindset. Not only that scarcity mindset is bullshit, but that when you share things and put them out in the world, it almost always comes back to you tenfold. Like, so you're not just giving things away. Incredible stuff comes back to you. And also, it's really taught me the power of accountability, and that showing up is kind of my very unsexy superpower. It's like I don't always know what I'm going to be doing, but I just kind of show up to the keyboard and just write something every week. And not every week is my best, that's for sure, but the times when I'm like, yeah, fucking nailed that. You have to go through like 20 weeks of kind of like average things to get something that's really good. And while, writing and this process of doing the newsletter is something that I've really come to embrace and enjoy a lot, I never want to be someone who just talks the talk. I'm always really wary about what I'm actually writing and if I actually practice it, because talk is cheap. And like I said, I never want to be someone who just talks the talk. I don't even want to be someone who walks the walk. I want to run the fucking run. So what's true for me may not necessarily be true for you. Honesty is a paradox, which is why I'm going to go back on everything I just said and say that honesty can be kind, helpful, sexy, and easy, but only if you don't abuse it for your own indulgence. So I think, don't abuse it for your own indulgence, because you've got to give people permission to be complicated. We're all multifaceted humans full of contradictions. And honestly, I'm okay with that. Thank you.
Guys, so we've got a little bit of time for Q&A, so don't run off. I've got the mic, so I'm going to start. G-Lord, tell me, so you write this blog every week. Can you tell me one that you've written that has just caught on? You've got a lot of feedback. It's maybe caused a little bit of controversy. People have been pretty fired up, maybe. I don't know. Is there something like that you can tell us about? So, and then you guys will just think if you've got questions for Gabby while she's answering this one. There you go.
Okay. So yes. I find that like the ones that I write about that are a bit more personal always tend to get a lot more responses. So sometimes I kind of just share, these are like cool things that I found this week. But usually if I write about something in a bit more depth, then people tend to relate to that stuff a lot more. But yeah, the controversial ones definitely do hit the spot. And one I wrote recently, it was about speaking at events for free at paid ticket events. So I'm not getting paid for this, but this is a free event and it's sponsored, and I absolutely wholeheartedly believe in what Creative Mornings is doing. But I really don't believe in hosting paid ticket events where people like students who can get the most out of these kinds of events aren't able to attend or can't afford to attend, or only the people that can come are the people that can afford it, and then the speakers don't get paid, and something just doesn't add up to me about that. So yeah, there was a little bit of controversy, but mainly people agreed with that.
What did people say, or what controversy did it cause?
Does anyone follow me on Twitter? Look, I mean, this is being recorded, so. Look, I mean, there's just, I think graphic design in general, like we're always kind of fighting to be paid and fighting for just people to value our work. And I think it's really disheartening when you're speaking for people that are supposed to be valuing what you do, and yet they don't pay you for putting together presentations that take a really long time to prepare. Like, I have been sweating over this for like 3 weeks. Thank you. But it's free and everyone can come, and you don't discriminate. Like, everyone's welcome, and you don't have to be from a certain socioeconomic background to attend these events, and that's why I think these things are super important. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, what is the most valuable piece of advice I've been given? Okay, cool. Oh God, there's a lot. I've been super lucky in the sense that I've had a lot of really great mentors. But I think the biggest thing that stuck for me is that you can't steer a parked car. And I think that we get so caught up about like making the idea perfect before you actually start anything, or that it's not completely finished before you launch something. But when you launch something, it's only ever going to be version 1.0. Like, there's always going to be a 2.0 and the 3.0, and you can always build and improve on it. But the biggest mistake you can make is just not doing anything or just not starting because you're worried it's not going to be perfect at the second it launches. So just start. That's the best thing I can say. And that, like, even my newsletter and all the projects that I've done, they definitely didn't look like that when I started. They've had so many versions, and I've had 3.5 years to kind of build on that and work on it. Yeah. Okay, so the question was, how do I find my mentors? Was there a follow-up? In the industry. Okay. Coming to events like this is really good. So, I mean, in uni, I was lucky enough to have like a lot of really good peers. They were all really hardworking, and I think that definitely drove me to work a lot harder. But getting involved in Creative Mornings was definitely something. So I used to help organize this chapter, like I said, and I met a bunch of people through that. I worked with a lot of really talented people who kind of took me under their wing. But I think if you're struggling to actually find people, just do your research and reach out to someone and just ask them, because a lot of the times, people are pretty busy, but if what you're asking for is pretty straightforward, then you'd be really surprised at how many people are willing to dedicate their time. But I will say a little plug for Christopher Doyle & Co., because they're running an initiative called This Is Not a University, which is specifically about this, and they're helping 2 people per semester or whatever it is, and they're going to they offer a mentorship program. So things like that, and initiatives like the Design Kids. Basically, yeah, just do your research, find out who you want to be your mentor, and just ask. The worst thing that happens is they can say no. Okay. Oh God, you first. Yeah. Okay. That's a really long question to repeat, but I'm going to say, yeah. So the question was, yeah, if after going overseas, the comparison kind of between the creative industry in Berlin versus the one here in Australia. Look, it is definitely different. I think most of the things is just like culturally, you learn a lot about, I don't know, it feels like a bit of an abstract term to say that, but and when you get there, you can it takes a while to put your finger on really what it is what I mean by that. So I feel like I'm going to do a really bad job of explaining that. But things that you could say here and they will just fly and like people totally understand what you're saying, you can say over there and people are like just does not compute, doesn't go in. So there's a lot of things like that. And also when you're designing in Australia, so much of what you design here is purely for the English speaking market. Whereas when I was over there, I was designing in English and German and French and Japanese and Mandarin. So it's like you localize a lot of the languages based on the market. Typesetting in Japanese is really weird. Yeah. But I don't know. How can I answer this? There was another part of your question. totally not as outcasts as we think we are. I think like we have this idea that like you go overseas and it's like this magical place where they're doing all this cool stuff, but it's just because everyone over there thinks Australia is amazing. You know, it's like you always want what you don't have and the grass is always greener. So I don't really think that the opportunities were better over there at all. Like that's not really why I moved. Maybe a little bit in the beginning, that's why I moved there, but I mainly just wanted to go and experience another culture. It was more about personal development than professional development about me going over there. And I think in terms of the things I've learned, it's really hard for me to separate that from Germany or whether that would just be how I developed as I progressed in my career. So not only have I had 4 years experience in Berlin, I've had just an extra 4 years experience on my career. So it's kind of hard to separate the two. So I actually don't know if it would be that different, but I will say that Australia's doing some really cool stuff here, and don't be intimidated by the other countries because we're cool too. Okay, so how did it come about that I started the newsletter? That's a good question. So I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but on a Sunday night when you're just like, shit, what have I done this weekend? And like it's Monday tomorrow and I'm freaking out and like you just feel like you haven't really achieved anything for the weekend. No one? Just me? I'll see myself out. Well, I don't know. Well, this is kind of before, maybe even before Netflix. Well, that I had Netflix, at least. But yeah, I would basically experience, I call it Sunday angst, where I would basically just have a little mini panic attack about my life and where I am. Just normal, millennial bullshit. And so I decided to start the newsletter as just like basically just a way to kind of wind down so that I could sleep. And ironically now it stops me from sleeping, but yeah, just a way to kind of collect all the things that I've seen that week. I also found myself like sharing a bunch of things with people and sending a lot of links to people kind of individually, and I really wanted an outlet for that. And I really just enjoy it, to be honest. Like I really just like finding all these cool things and being like, yeah, this is awesome. People should know about it. So it just kind of grew from that. It definitely wasn't something that I was intending to be as consistent as it has been, but now it's just habitual and it's just kind of, I just know that every Sunday I'm going to write it. So it'll happen. Yeah. Oh God. Did that affect your creative or career in any way? Did it slow it down? Okay, so did the turmoil affect my career? I mean, there was definitely turmoil. It was kind of hard in the beginning because I started my job pretty much straight away, and at the time I worked full time, and then I was taking German classes at night. And I mean, at the time, you move there and you don't really have that many friends, so I was like, all right, German class, let's do this. But it's a lot of stimulation, it's like a lot of new stuff, and it's very, very, I will say this, it's very, very different traveling through somewhere, and even if you're staying there for a month, knowing that it's temporary, opposed to moving somewhere and being like, all right, fuck, now what? So there was definitely turmoil, but I don't think it really affected me professionally because something that is different, maybe this relates to someone else's question, is that it's very common for multiple nationalities to work in a studio and for people to be moving from different countries to Germany and back out of the country all the time. So, I was working with people, a lot of Australians because we're everywhere, but then also, Germans obviously, but Finnish people, Russian people, Belgian, English. So yeah, it's just like people from everywhere. So they're very used to people coming and going. So everyone's kind of in a constant state of turmoil. Yeah. Yeah. All right. I think that's it.
I have the mic again, so I'm going to end with one question, which is, what's next for you in terms of what's some exciting shit coming up on the horizon?
Oh God. So even though I've just talked about how good Australia is, I'm not going to stay. I'm sorry. But again, I have to be honest with myself about what I want. So I've always wanted to go to New York, so that's my plan next. Yeah. Yeah, Chloe, hit me up.
Yeah, amazing. Guys,